If you were to ask almost anybody inside the mechanical keyboard hobby what switch type they thought were the worst, chances are they'll answer with clicky switches. However, even within the people who like clicky switches, they'll tell you that not all clickies are created equal. Here come into Clickjackets, or click sleeves, as other people would call them. Before I talk more, let's take a look into the history behind them. The first Clickjacket known is called the Cherry MX White. Although the date of which they were introduced is not known, they are confirmed to exist when they were included inside a 1985 datasheet, which referred to them as MX mit Druckpunkt, which translates to MX with pressure point. This inclusion suggests that the Clickjacket design wasn't initially meant to be clicky at all in the first place, but rather to create hysteresis, a phenomenon where the reset point in a switch is higher up than the actuation point. This seems to be the case as well, since the switches were originally greased from the factory to quiet the clicking noise. This grease was later removed, however, since there was an increasing demand for clicky switches at the time. Featuring lighter springs, the Cherry MX Blue and Green were born. After the introduction of the rubber dome over membrane, keyboards suddenly became much cheaper to produce, and this led to the crash of the switch market. Cherry, however, was left to be one of the few companies still producing switches, and this led to their dominance in the keyboard switch market. After their patent for the MX switch design expired, clones of their switches were being made left and right, and this included the blues and greens. With the exception of a few switches, such as the Altumu Phoenixes, these switches are widely regarded as some of the worst sounding switches you can get for a keyboard. It's for good reason as well. These switches are loud and proud, as some people would say. And because of the nature and how they were designed, they created a ton of extra noise even for a clicky switch. I mean, listen to it when I click down on the switch and shake it around. With the amount of rattle that Clickjackets create, you may be tempted to stay away from them as a whole. However, not all clicky switches are like this. There are many nice clickies out there, such as click bars, which include box jades, some of the most popular clickies in the MX switch circle, and click leaves, which produce a singular click and are found in Alps and Alps-like switches, arguably the best sounding clicky switch to be made. But that's beside the point. What I want to do here is to see if I can make this switch bearable with modifications, and whether or not we can make them viable as a switch option. The first modification that I'm going to do is a fairly common one, perhaps the most popular one to do to your keyboard. If you were to scour the internet to see how you can make your keyboard quieter, you'd most likely get a suggestion that you could put an O-ring between your keycap and key switch. Although I can predict that this would not help much at all with the loudness, I decided to remain fair and compare two blue switches, one without the O-ring and one with, to see if this modification would be a good option or not. As I'd expected, the O-ring did not do much at all to silence the click. Unfortunately for you, putting some pieces of rubber on your plastic won't save you from the rage your friends and the people in your call will rain upon you for choosing to be quirky and have clickies. Not to mention that the bottom out now feels like mush. It's almost as if you got a membrane keyboard, but it just became exponentially louder. You now may be asking yourself why your switches aren't quieter despite the countless videos on YouTube suggesting that you do this, and why you just wasted a good $5 on something you'll never use again. Simply put, the O-ring did not tackle the source of the clicking at all. It only made the sound when the switch is fully pressed quieter. Perhaps to make your keyboard quieter, we can tackle the clicking mechanism inside the switch itself. To understand how the Clickjacket works, we can open up our switches. To do this, you'd most likely need to take the switch out of your keyboard. If it's hot swap, this will be easy. If you can desolder, that will do as well. Here I'm just going to be using a tool to open up my switches, but if you have a screwdriver, that will work if you're in a pinch. Once we open up the switch, we can separate it into four main parts: the top housing, the stem, the spring, and the bottom housing. The part that is responsible for the clicking is the stem. As we can see, if we press down on the switch, the click jacket rattles around. This is what creates the clicking sound. How about we take a page out of Cherry's book? Cherry originally used grease in their MX whites to make them quieter. We can probably apply that to the MX blues as well. For this modification, you would of course need a form of lubricant. For me, I'm using Lube 3G, which is a blend that Gazzew, the person behind the boba switches, had given out the formula to. In the description, I'll be linking to the Reddit post as well as all the other resources that I used in order to make this video, so you might want to check them out. Now we can get to lubing. The process is fairly common within keyboard enthusiasts, but where you lube is entirely subjective. In my case, I'm only lubing the railings and the bottom of the switch. As for the spring, I'm going to be dipping one end of it inside the blend. The click is now much quieter in the switch, but it's still there. It may not be ideal. There is still that rattle that you can hear in the switch. There is a way, however, to make the click disappear entirely. Before there were good tactiles in the switch market, there was a mod called the Jailhouse mod. The idea of the Jailhouse mod is putting filler material inside the click jacket in order to stop the sleeve from moving around in the switch. In other words, it's turning the blue stem into a tactile. The Jailhouse mod can be done in many ways. The easiest and cheapest way would be to use size 002 O-rings in the switches. You first take off the click jacket, wrap the O-rings around the part of the stem that holds in the jacket, and reassemble the stem. Once you reassemble the switch, you should notice that the tactile profile of the switch changed. It's a sharp tactility, and at the top now, it isn't as tactile as what we have today, but it's definitely noticeable. The travel of the switch is now reduced by a bit, and the switch also gets a bit heavier from the longer stem. It is also something to note that with the Jailhouse modded switches, you do not need to worry about cherry profile interference on north facing. As you can hear, the bottom out now sounds very quiet and the feel reflects that. It's soft, almost mushy, but not as mushy as the other implementation of O-rings. Most importantly, however, that annoying rattle in the switch is gone. The result is not ideal. If you prefer the sound or feel of a tactile, this would not give you it. In order to get that, you might be inclined to do a different method of jailhouse mods, such as wrapping wire around the stems instead of O-rings. These methods, however, are harder to get consistent without messing anything up. That leads me to the ball bearing mod. This mod is one of my favorite, as it can be done to almost any switch and it comes with many advantages. In order to do it, all that you would need is some lubricant and the ball bearings of your size. For this mod, typically 1.5mm ball bearings are used. There will be exceptions, however, if your stem pole is longer than normal. Switches that have an elongated pole include Holy Pandas, Boba U4Ts, and NK Cream Franken switches. At the bottom housing of the switch, we can clearly see a hole in the center where the pole of the stem goes into. The idea of the mod is to put the bearing there so that the pull on the switch would hit the bearing, making the switch bottom out. We add some lubricant to the ball bearing so that it does not move around when it's inside the switch. As a result, the ball bearing mod decreases the total travel distance of the switch, but it makes a firm bottom out that's more pronounced than even normal switches. Switch travel is also reduced when doing this mod dependent on how large your ball bearings are.
I dated it Thanksgiving 1995. Just before Thanksgiving 1995, I found out that I was going to make $10 million dollars.
If you combine this mod with the Jailhouse mod, you have essentially turned your blue switches into tactiles. The modified blues feel wonderful in my opinion. You still have the tactility of the Jailhouse modded blue, but now you have a firm bottom out and almost no post travel after the bump. The sound is also great. If you were to put this next to any other tactile, I don't think you'd be able to tell the difference. Don't take my word for it though. I'll include a sound test of them right now, and after that show you the process of me making one of them.